for the video.
Yes.
She stands alone beside an empty grave, tears of a broken woman on her face. Somebody took the one she loved away. He saw the beautiful beneath the skies, the treasure hidden in her broken heart. So empty now because her Savior's gone. But then a voice said, "Don't you cry, it is I." Go tell the world that I'm alive. I'll never leave you, I'll be by your side. Look up and dry your eyes. Go tell the world that I'm alive. Just like that woman by an empty grave, I've done so many things that made me feel ashamed. I don't feel worthy of the call he gave, but he says, "Child, don't you doubt, you're forgiven now. Go tell the world that I'm alive. I'll never leave you, I'll be by your side. Look up and dry your eyes. Go tell the world that I'm alive. Go tell the world that I am here. And there's a love that conquers every fear. Now in the name of love, go tell the world that I'm alive. There is no past too dark, no pain too deep. There is no one, nowhere out of my reach. Go tell the world that I'm alive. I'll never leave you, I'll be by your side. Go tell the world that I am here. And there's a love that conquers every fear. Now in the
Okay. Sorry for that. I believe I was talking without you being able to hear me. So, yeah, I'm used to my own little system. I'm not used to mics. So bear with me. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon to be with me. And if you are watching live, then please let me know in the chat, because it's nice to know I'm not talking to myself. And also in the chat at the end, or even during, you can put any questions that you have, and I will try and answer them at the end. I'm not a Magdalene expert by any means, but I will try and do what I can, and if I can't, I will find out and get back to you. So this afternoon we are delving into a remarkable woman's life, who certainly deserves more credit and exposure than our biblical canon offers her. So because of a shortage of time this afternoon in compiling this presentation, I've only used one resource, and that is Cynthia Bourgeau's book on Mary, called The Meaning of Mary Magdalene, Discovering the Woman at the Heart of Christianity. Normally, I wouldn't rely on one source of reference in preparing a document. However, Cynthia is a renowned scholar, and her research passport is very credible, and she is extremely well respected, especially in this area. She is an Episcopalian Reed Anglican priest, mentor, researcher, mystic, and writer. She has published many books. She's a colleague of the likes of Richard Rohr, Thomas Keating, the late Thomas Merton. Please bear in mind that Cynthia and a number of others have written whole books on Mary Magdalene. And so all I can really do this afternoon is pull through some threads, some main threads about her life, who she was and who she was to Jesus. Why was she so important, although we never hear about her, very seldom hear about her? When I was researching this, I was looking for some music and some, Mary, Jesus' mother has her own Magnificat. I was looking perhaps if there was something like that for Mary, but nothing at all in our liturgy for Mary Magdalene. She really has been hit to leg by the Church Fathers. There is clear resistance against her. And her identity has been very damaged over the years by patriarchal and misogynistic theologians. I'm not a great big feminist, but one can see this when one reads. She was considered a whore and a prostitute and a sinner, for which Cynthia tells us there's very little justification for that. In fact, these days you hear of it less. She was an apostle. She was the apostle and a teacher. And Cynthia calls her the archetype of divine wisdom, or the divine feminine. In my mind right now, I hear echoes of Sophia, another feminine essence downplayed in the Bible, that we can learn a great deal from, especially about wisdom. And the only place you'll find her in the Bible is in Proverbs. Thomas Merton gave her a much higher pedigree in terms of who she is, but I won't go into that here. Cynthia says that whenever a new infusion of love is needed, Mary shows up. Cynthia sometimes has this tricky turn of phrase, but what I understand from this as I step back to look at the bigger picture is that Mary personified three profound elements. Divinity. She is considered divine. Wisdom and love. And the inference here is that if we want to understand Christian love, we need to look towards the life and actions of Mary Magdalene I can't think of a better time than now to remind ourselves about the soft, feminine love and wisdom that she encapsulates. And I can't think of a better time for a powerful infusion of love in our world. Mary was beloved of Jesus. She was a teacher and a master of spirituality in her own right. The author of The Cloud of Unknowing tells us she was forgiven because she was much loved. We are told in Scripture that Jesus cast 7 demons out of her, which of course is the basis for the disrepute she was initially held in, and many people still hold her in that disrepute. It is interesting that this information is only told to us in Luke chapter 8, verse 2, and alluded to quite vaguely in Mark in 16:9. In my opinion, Luke tends to paint a rather grey, distant picture of Mary, rather than the primary picture which the other Gospels reflect. There is no mention of this disease of mind and or body anywhere other than in Luke's Gospel. And if you read Luke and you sort of read around it, he definitely doesn't give her a place of priority. And I don't really understand why, because Luke was not a disciple. He did not get his information firsthand from walking beside Jesus, like the likes of Matthew and John. So, all that he wrote in his Gospel and in Acts is actually from what he gleaned from Paul and perhaps 1 or 2 disciples that he might have had access to. It couldn't have been very many, because most of the inner circle of Jesus' disciples were actually executed very soon, with the exception of John, but John went to Asia, so he wasn't around. So I kind of look at Luke's Gospel with a little bit of, maybe, eyewitness is considered questionable. This wasn't even an eyewitness. And also Luke must have written a long time after Jesus' time and after Mary's time, because he was traveling with Paul. And he only met Paul in Asia, in Troas, when Paul went to visit him as a doctor. And I think it's his second missionary journey. So he was quite old already then, trained and working as a doctor. And then Paul died in the 60s, so of the first century. And Luke was present at his execution. He was with him in jail. So, he couldn't have started writing until after, at the very earliest, the late 60s, sorry. So I have a little bit of problem with Luke, as you've probably already caught onto, but that's the context of Luke's Gospel, okay. Mary's status was of a high order. She was superior to Jesus' mother, who seemed to play a very much of a background role. And she was most certainly part of Jesus' inner circle of disciples. I see her as Jesus' private confidant, someone he shared his deepest feelings and secrets with. I see a significant element of trust between them. So let's move on then to say, why was she made in this very high position of apostle to the apostles? So she was apostle to the likes of Paul and the inner circle disciples. She was their teacher, particularly after Jesus' death. So Cynthia argues that Mary earned the title of leader of the apostles because of all Jesus' students. she was the one who best caught the full meaning of his teaching and was best able to walk the talk. In other words, she lived the life that Jesus talked about. She followed in his way, in a way that not even the main disciples did. And yet we never hear anything about how she walked the talk. They don't tell us. Apart from a very few stories of her anointing Jesus, her presence at the cross, and being the first to encounter the post-crucifixion Christ at the tomb. Now, even the four Gospels have different stories about that, but they do agree that she was the first witness to Jesus' resurrection. John's Gospel has her arrive alone at the tomb. So she encounters Jesus alone. In Mark's Gospel, she arrives with the other two Marys, which would have been Jesus' mother and possibly Mary of Bethany. In Matthew, it seems it is Mary Magdalene and one other Mary. Doesn't say which one. And in Luke's Gospel, she is mentioned collectively with other people as witnesses to the resurrection. And as will be seen from the scriptures, she is not only the first to witness the post-crucifixion Christ, but she was also commissioned by Jesus to take the news to the world that he was alive through his disciples and his family. That's another awesome privilege that Jesus gave to her. She was also the one who anointed Jesus during the Passover when he visited their home. And here it is implied that the person, Martha's sister, who anointed Jesus' feet was Mary Magdalene. That is not confirmed in the other Gospels. In fact, the other Gospels have a completely different story about this incident, this event. They have it happening in another place, in Simon's house, not in the home of Lazarus. So it's really only in John where it is there. These are very high honors which cannot be ignored or taken lightly. And it is primarily why she is called the Gospel to the apostles of the leader of the apostles, or the first apostle. Those are the names that she is given. You know, for me, I think it's rather lovely that there is a woman in Mary Magdalene and in Sophia who is very integral to Christ. We have had such a male-dominated context in our religious teaching, in our churches, that it's really, really nice, and I really want to reach out to this idea of Mary Magdalene being significant, because I need that as a woman, and I'm sure other women would embrace that as well. The thing is that we have been given to be suspicious of her, but ask the question, who taught us to be suspicious of her? Mary was also one of the three women who stayed at the foot of the cross with the beloved disciple, who we know as John, right to the end of the crucifixion. All the soldiers and the people had run away. The people who were there were terrified. The people who followed Jesus, who were Christians, terrified that they would get killed by the soldiers. The soldiers ran away at all the amazing events that were happening, and it was just Mary, the three Marys, and John left at the foot of the cross. And that is where that lovely scene plays out, where Jesus tells John, "Here is your mother," and tells his mother, "Here is your son." So Mary Magdalene's role in the life of Jesus. Jesus' incarnation meant that he came to be part of our human world, to better understand our lives on earth and how he could relate to us. That is what I believe. He experienced all aspects of life so that he could understand us. And so it is not alien to me that he would experience a relationship with a woman, as he has been, as some people think, that he was in relationship with Mary, because a relationship of love is very central to our lives on earth, very central to the way we live. There are a number of scholars of Mary and theologians who will claim that Mary and Joseph were married and had children. This upsets a lot of people. For me, I prefer Cynthia's take on this. It makes a little more sense to me. She is more informed and she is well researched. And she says that there was most certainly a significant relationship between Mary and Jesus, but it was not of the superficial romantic type that we refer to today. Mary and Jesus' deep bonds of love were spiritual in nature, according to Cynthia. The relationship between them showcased love, but the kind of love that God talks about. A deep, unconditional, abiding love between two people who are united in the way of Christ. Cynthia says their kind of bond was one that is probably difficult to understand in the West today. So why does she say the West? Well, in the early days, the church, and this happened around and before the time of the Nicene Creed, which was in the third and fourth century of the where they wrote the Nicene Creed. There was a split in the church, the Eastern Church, which we are talking about now, Asia, Turkey, around that area, and the Western Church, which was obviously clearly primarily Rome and other parts of the Western world. Now, the Eastern Church disagreed with the Nicene Creed, even after it was added to or amended 60 years later. And that's where there was a split between East and West. Now, if you look at the East, an example is the Greek Orthodox Church, which would very much represent the Eastern perspective. And our churches are Western perspective. And I don't think that's such a bad thing. But anyway, I tend to gravitate more to the thinking of the Eastern Church because it's soft and it's gentle. So now I've preambled away, and we're talking about their relationship, which is difficult to understand in the West. Okay, the Eastern people would have understood it. They much better, okay, because of their softness and their gentleness. It epitomized the essence of the Christian journey from the false self to the true self, the archetype of spiritual transformation that is so difficult for many of us to achieve. Now, the journey from the false self to the true self is that kenotic journey that we often talk about, and Mike often talks about, where it's a journey of self-emptying. So that quote from, I think it's John 3:30, more of you and less of me, that epitomizes the process. So we divest ourselves of the world and we allow Jesus to fill us completely. And that is not an easy thing to do. But Mary got it and she did it. Okay? She got it right. Well, she was right there, right next to the master. So lucky her. And this profound, somewhat unfathomable experience or journey that they walked together was the basis for their relationship. I share with you here a quote from Cynthia Bourgeois, which may be difficult to access, but nevertheless authentic and worthwhile considering. Here it is. As with all lovers who have lived to the full the wager that love is stronger than death, the faithfulness of their two hearts resonating across time and space forms a particular kind of energy channel through which divine compassion pours itself forth as wisdom and creativity. So this is the kind of channel, this energy channel, which probably she's saying even after the death of Christ, kept Mary and Jesus connected. And you know, the mystics talk a lot about visions and that kind of thing. So I'm guessing that what she's alluding to is that she would have had visions. She actually, after Jesus dies, I'm told, went to live in a cave. She was a recluse and very, very, very spiritual. So, you know, one can understand that sort of thing happening in that context. But that's rather a lovely quote, I think, and it really does give us a picture of a different way of relating to people. I think we're very limited on earth, and in the way that we have to have these romantic love relationships and have to be worshipped and adored by our partners all the time. Sorry, I don't want to sound what's the word I want? I've forgotten. But I think there are other ways of loving people that are deeper and richer and more wonderful, where we actually give of ourselves. Jesus' words in Mark 14:9 confirm that Mary was not only important to him, but important to the gospel of Christ, and that she is important enough to be remembered into the future alongside him. When I read this quote, I was so shocked, because I haven't just read John, I've studied John. And this never jumped out at me then. And actually it went back to the gospel to check if Cynthia was right. And of course she was. But listen to what Jesus says about Mary's place. And this quote just happened after it was at the anointing of his feet. And it was just after, it's actually Jesus' response to Judas, who complains about her wasting this precious oil instead of using the money to feed people. And in defense of her, Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, wherever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her." In other words, Jesus wanted Mary to be significant, like the disciples, and remembered past his death. And probably Jesus would have wanted her in the canon, in the biblical canon, because it's implied from these words. She was important. She was important in terms of teaching the gospel to people. It didn't happen, though. Mary was loved by Jesus. She was significant in his purpose on earth. She was wise and she was loving. Whatever she was before she met Jesus, she certainly experienced a spiritual renaissance in her journey with him. She is an example to those of us who would like to follow in the footsteps of Jesus. She must come out into the light and take her rightful place in the gospel story. She has her own gospel, which we aren't allowed to read because it's agnostic gospel, and as far as our church teaching is concerned, agnostic gospel is heretical. But if you read Cynthia, she doesn't understand, because she says there's so much in that gospel that is in the Bible, and that it doesn't dispute Christian principles at all. So if you want to read more about her, you can read her gospel, or you can read one of the books written about her. If I've managed to awaken your interest in her, a good start is to read Cynthia's book. Just a word on Cynthia. She writes like a theological academic, okay? It's kind of sometimes a different language. And so she's not an easy read. She's quite dense. There are a lot of other books. If you just go onto Amazon and type in Mary Magdalene, you'll see there's a lot of other books about her. I've read a lot of Cynthia. I like her thinking. Parts of it I don't like, but mostly I like this part very much. So I chose to read that one. I also believe that what she says, she has well researched. So that's why I chose this one, and I had the book with me, so it was a time saver. So thank you so much for listening this afternoon, and I hope that I've awakened a desire in you to know more about Mary Magdalene, and I hope maybe I have given you some new insights that you didn't know about before. So I don't see any questions in the chat, so I think I will just say goodbye. And if you want to put questions in the chat, I'll check later and answer them where I can. Okay. God bless. Lots of love.